people would read American history the way that they read the Epstein files, and maybe they would stop like hero worshiping our founders, because the same class of people who founded this country, in so many ways, were the Epstein class. They were the most wealthy people in the history of the country, the most connected, the most powerful. They owned other human beings. They raped them. They raped children. And they did all of these things that people are so disgusted to see in the Epstein files. And it's all written there. It's all in our history. It's not hard to find. You don't have to wait for the DOJ to release it. It's right there. And yet, that's who we want to consult when we decide what's right for our country now, when we have questions about our own liberty, around how our own government should function, around what is right and what is wrong, and what the government should do or shouldn't do. We want to consult those people. Why don't we just ask, what would Jeffrey Epstein want us to do? That's how it feels. I mean, I've talked about this before, but, you know, every white person in the history of this country, you know, prior to the abolition of slavery and after, but really prior to the abolition of slavery, benefited from slavery, right? Regardless of whether or not they owned a slave. I just want to be clear to say that. But never more than like 50% of the population owned another human being. At no point, and none of the states did more than 50% of the population own another human being. It was always more like, I think at the most, I'm trying to remember which state it was like Mississippi, I think. But either way, it was like 48% of the population, of the white population, owned a slave. But of that number, or of the total population, I should say, it was never more than 2 or 3% that owned more than 1,000 slaves. Almost everyone who owned a slave owned one, maybe two, right? It was never a lot of slaves. Again, doesn't make it right. But the reason why I pointed out that class of people, the people who owned 1,000 or more other human beings, they're the ones who founded this country. That's the Thomas Jeffersons. That's the James Madisons. That's the George Washingtons. They are the most wealthy and most powerful and most connected people in the history of this country. And they engaged in rape, human trafficking, assault, child rape, all these things. They did all of it. And they wrote our Constitution. And we're seeing it now. There's this meme going around of like who wasn't in the files, you know? You know who wasn't in the files? And I think that's important. I think we should dwell on that a little bit more, because we often do this historical relativism where we say, well, you know, history, you know, we can't judge them by today's morality. You know, they were just engaged in something that was okay at the time. It wasn't okay at the time. People knew slavery was wrong at the time. Most people didn't do it. And it's the same thing with Epstein, right? Like, we need to be very clear about how easy it is to not be in the Epstein files. There are tons of people who are not in the Epstein files. And there are tons of people throughout this nation's history who did not own slaves. And it's just mind-blowing to me that people will get so scandalized by what's in those Epstein files and in these letters and who's implicated. But then they'll turn around and hero worship George Washington or Thomas Jefferson. It's really need to start teaching people how to apply like consistent moral ethics and things like that, because there's no material difference between the people in those Epstein files and the people who drafted the Constitution of the United States. And in fact, you could argue that the reason why Epstein happened is because the people who wrote the laws of this country were child sex predators. Right? People need to stop acting like everything bad in this country just started in the last 20 years.